Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me today. Some stories begin with a storm, but this one starts with a missing child, a haunted detective, and a loyal German shepherd whose instincts might be the only thing standing between hope and heartbreak. On a foggy evening in Magnolia Park, as fear sweeps through the pines, Detective Sarah Bennett and her partner Shadow must race the darkness to save a little girl and uncover secrets their whole town tried to forget. If you've ever wondered what real courage looks like, or how far loyalty can carry us through the unknown, this story is for you. Drop a comment below if it moves you, and please hit like and subscribe to the channel to support even more stories of hope, bravery, and second chances. Let's dive in. They say the pines hold secrets, and that evening in Magnolia Park, it felt like every twisted branch and drifting fog bank was hiding something. A presence, a shadow, a child's voice fading into the cold. Detective Sarah Bennett's boots hit the gravel hard as she strode across the parking lot, the last orange edge of dusk sliding behind the evergreens. The radio on her hip crackled, a sharp, urgent voice. Amber Alert! 9-year-old Lily Walker, last seen near the East Playground. Blue hoodie, pink sneakers, all units respond. Sarah's pulse hammered as she scanned the scene. Lights bouncing over swings and picnic tables, clusters of parents clutching each other, search teams forming hurried lines. Someone sobbed, the sound carrying over the low wind. A little girl's mother, bent nearly double, her hands pressed to her face, surrounded by neighbors and strangers who didn't know what to say. Sarah knew that raw panic. She'd felt it before, sitting alone in the dark as a kid, waiting for someone to come home. Beside her, Shadow, a German shepherd with a glossy black and tan coat, sharp eyes, and a reputation for instincts bordering on the supernatural, stood with his head high, nose quivering. He was more than a partner. He was the reason Sarah was here at all, the reason she'd survived a job that sometimes felt like drowning in sorrow. Tonight, though, even Shadow looked unsettled, every muscle tense. Let's get to work, Sarah said softly, and Shadow pressed his flank against her leg in answer. She knelt, holding out Lily's favorite scarf, a faded blue strip with tiny white dogs printed along the edge, still smelling of childhood and home. Shadow sniffed, snorting, then jerked his head toward the trees, while the rest of the team combed the obvious: the playground, the parking lot, the bathrooms. Shadow led Sarah away, nose to the ground, paws silent on the mossy earth. The trees swallowed them quickly, muffling the shouts and flashlights behind. Sarah's breath plumed in the cold as she followed, fighting an urge to look back. It was the first real test for the new command team, and the tension was electric. Sarah caught fragments of radio chatter, her sergeant ordering everyone to stay within line of sight, a junior officer nervously listing Lily's description for the 5th time. But Shadow seemed immune to the noise. He stopped, ears flicking, eyes shining with something Sarah couldn't name. He looked at her, and for a second, she almost asked him what he knew. A few feet away, a child's purple headband lay half buried in pine needles. Sarah picked it up with gloved hands, heart thudding. "Good boy, Shadow," she murmured. The dog wagged once, nose twitching. A woman's voice called from the park, "Detective Bennett, over here!" But Sarah waved them off, the headband held high. "Shadow's got the scent," she called. She could feel their skepticism, the pressure to stick with the group, but she couldn't ignore Shadow's certainty. They pressed on, branches clawing at Sarah's jacket, the sky growing darker by the minute. The pines closed in, the underbrush thick with brambles. Shadow's pace quickened. Suddenly, he stopped at the edge of a drainage culvert, its rusted grate gaping like a mouth. Water dripped below, echoing in the tunnel. Sarah hesitated. The protocol was clear. Never enter a confined space alone. Wait for backup. Wait for orders. But the scarf in her pocket felt heavy. Shadow looked back, then stepped into the darkness, tail high. "Damn it," Sarah whispered, following. The flashlight beam danced over slimy concrete, graffiti, and bits of trash. The sound of their footsteps echoed, a heartbeat, a warning. Shadow snuffled, then barked, sharp and insistent. Sarah's nerves snapped tight. She crouched, peering into the gloom. A faint whimper. Barely there, but enough. Sarah's breath caught. She crawled deeper, scraping her knee. Lily, it's Detective Bennett. I'm here to help you." Shadow's here, too. There, a movement. The gleam of a child's eye reflecting the beam. Lily, huddled behind a pile of damp cardboard, her face streaked with tears, a scrape on her forehead. She looked so small, clutching a muddy sneaker in one trembling hand. Shadow crept forward, lying down, his tail thumping gently. Lily's hand reached out, fingers twisting in his fur. Sarah swallowed hard, blinking away the burn behind her eyes. "I've got you," she promised, her voice rough. "You're safe now." She radioed for medics, her words shaking as the reality hit. Behind her, the searchers' voices grew louder, closer, shouts echoing down the tunnel. Shadow didn't move, not even when the flashlight swept over them, not even when Sarah scooped Lily into her arms. He stayed, calm and watchful, his eyes on the darkness beyond, as if daring it to try and take the girl again. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. Child found alive, detective and K9 hailed as heroes. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The scent in the air, oil, fear, something metallic, clung to her jacket. As she handed Lily over to waiting paramedics and watched the mother collapse in grateful sobs, Sarah caught Shadow's gaze. He was still searching the night, still listening, still warning. The case was only just beginning. Rain began to fall, first in icy droplets that stung Sarah's cheeks, then in a heavy Pacific downpour that smeared the last colors of sunset into shadows. The commotion at Magnolia Park was still a storm of voices, relief and fear and questions that piled up faster than puddles on the cracked blacktop. But for Sarah, time slowed to a taut, pulsing thread. Her mind replaying Lily's rescue over and over, searching for what she'd missed. She knelt beside the ambulance, steadying Lily's hand with both of hers. The little girl clung to Shadow, burying her face in his thick fur. Her words came out in broken whispers, barely audible over the slap of rain on the roof. "He put me in a car. There was a mask I couldn't see. He said to be quiet, or he'd leave me forever. Then there was noise and he got scared and ran." Sarah asked gentle questions, but Lily's memory blurred. A black SUV, she thought. The whisper of an engine. The smell of something sharp and oily. No license plate that she could remember. Her hands shook so badly Sarah covered them with her own. Shadow's ears twitched, restless. He sat pressed to Lily's side until the EMT coaxed her away, then returned to Sarah's heel, head tilted toward the trees. The other officers were already packing up, the search grid dissolving, radios popping with orders to regroup at the station. The sergeant, red-faced and winded, gave Sarah a tight nod. "Nice work, Bennett. We'll let forensics take it from here. You get some rest. You look like hell." But Sarah's mind wouldn't let go. She stepped aside, pulling Shadow close, her fingers twisting through his collar. "You're not done, are you?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Shadow pulled, sudden and insistent, away from the park lights, away from the ambulance's blue glare. Sarah hesitated only a second, then let herself be led, boots squelching through mud. The official perimeter, marked by plastic tape and cones, meant nothing to Shadow. He skirted the playground, nose low, ears tuned to scents no human could detect. The woods were thick, the underbrush tangled with blackberry and ferns, but he wove through as if on a leash of pure instinct. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from the captain. "Protocol, Bennett. Do not pursue. Return to station." She muted it, cursing under her breath. Rules meant safety, but instinct meant survival. Tonight, her gut belonged to Shadow. They reached the edge of the forest, where a chain-link fence sagged behind a thicket of brambles. Shadow paused, hackles lifting, and snuffled at the base of the fence. Sarah squatted, squinting into the gloom. There, a gap, barely big enough for a child, torn by small, desperate hands. On the other side, a muddy slide angled down into a concrete drainage ditch. Shadow bolted through, and Sarah followed, ignoring the sting of thorns and the sodden chill that soaked through her jeans. The world shrank to the sound of Shadow's panting, the beat of her own heart, the hiss of rain on metal. She clicked her flashlight on, the beam bouncing off wet walls. Inside the storm drain, the air was heavy, stale, metallic, almost chemical. It wasn't just water that trickled beneath their feet. Sarah's boots slid over something slick. She steadied herself on the wall, scanning for any sign, a scrap of fabric, a footprint, a clue missed by the main search. Shadow's pace grew frantic. He whined, darting ahead, then circling back, barking twice, sharp, demanding. Sarah's pulse spiked. "What is it, boy?" she breathed. She pushed deeper, shoulder brushing the slimy concrete, the smell intensifying until it was almost unbearable, a glint in the darkness. Sarah crouched, picking up a tiny charm, plastic, cheap, the kind that dangles from a child's backpack. She recognized it instantly, a cartoon unicorn smeared with dirt and oil. Lily's mother had described it earlier, sobbing, as the little girl's favorite. "Good boy," Sarah whispered, voice breaking. "You found it." The tunnel branched suddenly, left and right, the left side clogged with debris and garbage, the right side sloping sharply downward. Shadow chose right without hesitation. Sarah swallowed her fear, forcing her legs to follow. It was almost impossible to hear over the rush of water, but Sarah caught something, a soft, hiccuping sob somewhere ahead. Shadow's ears pricked. He surged forward, barking a warning, his tail high and stiff. Sarah rounded the corner, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. There, in a filthy alcove, sat Lily, knees hugged to her chest, shivering violently. Her face was ghost pale, eyes wide and unfocused. Shadow approached, slowly, tail wagging. Lily blinked, recognizing the big dog, and threw herself into his side, her tiny hands gripping his ruff. "Lily," Sarah gasped, dropping beside her. She checked for injuries, scraped knees, a bruise on her arm, a deep cut on her ankle that oozed blood, but looked clean. "It's okay. You're safe. I'm taking you home." Shadow stood guard as Sarah coaxed Lily to her feet, half carrying, half guiding her back through the twisting tunnel. At the mouth of the drain, blue lights flashed. Backup finally arriving, officers shouting her name. Paramedics rushed to meet them, voices blurring in the rush of adrenaline. But as Sarah handed Lily off, she caught a new scent, faint but distinct. gasoline, motor oil, and something bitter, almost chemical. She looked at Shadow, who stared back, hackles still raised. Later, as they sat in the cruiser with the heater blasting, Sarah replayed every step. The rain beat against the roof, drowning out the world. Shadow curled at her feet, head on her boot, eyes open and wary. Sarah's hands shook, not from cold, but from the knowledge that someone had planned this, that the darkness in Magnolia Park was more than an accident. "We're not done, boy," she whispered, tracing the unicorn charm with her thumb. "We're just getting started." Outside, the pines swayed in the storm, secrets shifting in the wind, and Sarah knew the hunt was only beginning. The next morning, the town felt changed. The news of Lily's rescue had spread, but relief was laced with unease. Sarah sat in the police station's break room, a mug of black coffee cooling in her hands, her mind unwilling to settle. Shadow sprawled on the floor, head resting on his paws, but his eyes were never quite closed, ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. Outside, rain still fell, a stubborn gray drizzle that turned the streets and pine needles slick with mud. Sarah should have been resting. Her phone vibrated constantly with texts from her captain, from city officials, from local reporters wanting a statement. She ignored most of them. She was here for Lily's official statement, waiting for the social worker to bring her in, but her mind wandered back to the storm drain, to the muddy slide and the sharp, chemical scent. She replayed the image of Lily's eyes, wide with fear and something else, a knowing, an old pain that Sarah recognized in her own reflection. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself drift. Memories came unbidden. Files, old missing children's cases, photos of kids who'd never made it home. Some nights, they haunted her dreams. Some days, she wondered if she should have chosen another career, one less prone to heartbreak. But Shadow always seemed to know when she was on the edge, pressing his warm body into her side, as if to say, "Don't quit yet." The door opened with a soft creak, and Lily entered, her small hand tucked into the social worker's. The girl wore a borrowed sweatshirt, sleeves too long, hair brushed into a neat ponytail. Her cheeks were pale, her eyes a little less frightened. She smiled shyly at Shadow, who immediately stood and nudged her hand. "Hi, Lily," Sarah said, her voice gentle. "Do you remember me?" Lily nodded. "You found me. And Shadow." She stroked the dog's head, her fingers tangling in his fur. "He's not scary like other big dogs." "He's the bravest partner I know," Sarah said, smiling. She took a seat beside Lily, glancing at the social worker, who nodded in approval. "Lily, can you tell me what you remember about last night? Take your time. If anything feels too scary, you can just say, 'Stop.'" Lily fidgeted, biting her lip. She spoke haltingly at first, her story coming in fits and starts. She remembered playing on the swings, chasing a red ball, her mother chatting with another parent nearby. She remembered a man's voice, soft but strange, telling her he'd found her lost toy, beckoning her toward the parking lot. "He had gloves," she said, looking down, "and his face was covered, like a mask." Sarah's stomach twisted. She took notes but kept her voice calm. "Do you remember the car?" Lily nodded, eyes darting up. It was black, really big. There was a sticker on the window, a horse. She hesitated. It smelled bad inside, like gas and something else. It made me cough. Shadow shifted, nose twitching. Sarah scribbled in her notebook. "That's really helpful, Lily. You did so well." She squeezed Lily's hand gently. Lily's story triggered something deeper in Sarah, A flood of old cases, many unsolved. The details piled up. The black SUV, the mask, the chemical scent. And always, the fear. She thought of Emma Rodriguez, missing at age 10. Malik Turner vanished from his front yard at 7. Each case had ended in heartbreak. The trail gone cold before Sarah could find answers. The police had moved on. The files closed and buried in a cabinet no one wanted to open. As Lily spoke, Sarah saw echoes of those other children in her eyes. A haunted, searching look, as if she expected the world to disappear at any moment. For a moment, Sarah was 9 again, cowering beneath her foster father's table, praying the footsteps would fade, wishing someone would come for her. She pushed the memory down, focusing on the present. "You're safe now, Lily. I promise." After the interview, the social worker led Lily away. Sarah sat for a long moment, staring at her notes. Shadow bumped her knee, pressing his cold nose against her wrist. She reached down, stroking his fur. "What do you think, boy?" she murmured. "Am I missing something?" The department was already moving on, eager to claim a win and return to routine. The captain's congratulatory email was short, perfunctory. "Good job. Case closed pending forensics. Return to normal assignments." Sarah almost laughed. She couldn't shake the sense that the story wasn't over, that Lily's rescue was just one thread in a much larger, tangled web. After lunch, Sarah wandered to the evidence room, requesting old files from the past 3 years. Missing kids, attempted abductions, anything that might match. The clerk rolled his eyes, muttering about wasting time, but Sarah insisted. She spent hours poring over dusty folders, her desk piling high with photos, reports, and dead ends. Shadow sat at her feet, silent and alert. Patterns began to emerge, details she'd never seen before. Each case featured a similar vehicle, a child lured with a false promise, a lingering scent of oil or chemicals at the scene. In every report, the descriptions were vague, the fear palpable. Sometimes there were rumors of a masked figure, never confirmed. As evening settled over the town, Sarah sat in her cramped office, exhaustion weighing heavy on her shoulders. She looked at the wall, where she'd pinned photos of Lily and the other missing kids. Their faces stared back, hopeful, innocent, lost. Shadow nudged her hand again, his eyes gentle. Sarah knew she should go home, should rest, should let someone else take over. But she couldn't. The puzzle pieces didn't fit. Not yet. Somewhere out there, someone was hunting children, and Sarah wasn't about to let them vanish into the pines. She closed her eyes, vowing to dig deeper. For Lily, for every child the system had failed. And as Shadow lay his head on her lap, she whispered, "We're not giving up. Not now. Not ever." The fight was just beginning. The night crept in slowly, a thick curtain of fog rolling between the ancient pines as Sarah drove home. But sleep felt like a luxury for someone else. The town outside her car windows blurred into a dim trail of street lamps and lonely porches, each one a silent witness to the secrets she was determined to uncover. Shadow, riding shotgun, gazed out the window, nose twitching at every shifting breeze. The radio on her dash mumbled static, news of the hero detective and her miracle dog making the rounds, but Sarah switched it off. She wasn't interested in heroics. She wanted answers. Instead of heading home, she turned the car toward the station, pulling into the lot long after the last patrols had clocked out. The building was half dark, the vending machines humming in the hallway as she let herself in. Her office was a small space, cluttered with old case files and sticky notes, lit only by the glow of her desk lamp. Shadow hopped up onto the battered sofa in the corner, curled up, but his golden eyes watched Sarah's every move. She spread the files across her desk, photos and reports fanning out in a grim mosaic. Faces of missing kids, maps with circled locations, lists of evidence that had gone nowhere. Sarah's fingers traced the lines on each paper, looking for the thread she knew had to be there. The room was silent except for the scratch of her pen and the steady, comforting sound of Shadow's breathing. As midnight approached, the world outside vanished into mist and rain. Sarah leaned back, rubbing her tired eyes. She spoke softly, more to herself than to her companion. "What am I missing, Shadow? What are you trying to show me?" The only answer was Shadow's gentle sigh, the thump of his tail when she met his gaze. But the presence of her loyal partner kept her steady, helped her focus through the exhaustion. She spoke her thoughts aloud, letting the patterns swirl in her mind. 4 disappearances in 3 years, always near the outskirts, always a scent of oil or chemicals, and each time someone reports a dark vehicle, but it's never caught on camera. She shuffled through the files, her hands trembling. There, a report from 6 months ago. A missing boy found wandering near an abandoned warehouse, too frightened to speak. Sarah circled the location. Another from last year. A girl gone missing after soccer practice. Her backpack recovered in an alley behind a shuttered auto shop. And Lily, rescued from a storm drain less than half a mile from an old storage facility that had been closed for years. Her pulse quickened. She marked the sites on a map, Shadow lifting his head as she worked. The dots formed a crooked line, all within a few miles of each other, all linked by back roads and forest trails. The pattern was faint, but it was there. She wondered why no one else had seen it, or if they'd simply stopped looking. She turned to her computer, searching for property records, police reports, any sign of recent activity in the abandoned buildings. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but she pressed on, muttering, "Come on, Sarah, think." Shadow yawned, then padded over to her, resting his big head in her lap. She smiled despite herself, running her fingers over his ears. "We're close, aren't we, buddy?" Shadow's presence was more than comfort. There was something about his stillness, the trust in his eyes, that gave Sarah the strength to keep going. She pulled out her phone and recorded a voice memo, just to get the thoughts out of her head. Possible link between sites, abductions all near old industrial areas, all within a certain radius. Next step, cross-check witness statements for overlapping details, scent, vehicle, any descriptions of the suspect. It was well past 1 in the morning when Sarah finally stood, stretching her stiff back. She glanced at the wall, where photos of Lily and the other children formed a silent gallery. "We're going to get him, Shadow. I promise." The German shepherd nuzzled her hand, as if agreeing. Before leaving, Sarah checked the evidence locker, just in case. There, in a sealed bag, was Lily's unicorn charm, still flecked with grime. Next to it, a strip of duct tape taken from the scene, and a child's drawing found near one of the old warehouses. A crude sketch of a car, a masked face, and something else. A dog. Sarah stared at the picture, a chill running through her. Had Lily seen Shadow in her dreams? Or had the predator used a dog to lure his victims? A creak from the hallway snapped her from her thoughts. She grabbed her sidearm, tense, but it was only the janitor, whistling as he emptied trash bins. Sarah exhaled, lowering her weapon, feeling the ache of adrenaline. On her way out, she paused at the evidence board, tacking up the map with her new pattern. Shadow sat at her feet, silent and strong. For a moment, the only sound was the rain beating the windows and the hum of the fluorescent lights. Sarah felt her fatigue melting into resolve. She gathered her things, Shadow at her side, and headed back into the rain. She didn't have answers, not yet, but she had a path to follow, and a partner she trusted with her life. As they drove home through the sleeping town, Sarah kept her eyes on the empty streets, heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she'd start knocking on doors no one wanted to open, asking questions no one wanted to answer. And Shadow would be with her, every step of the way. Out in the pines, the secrets waited, but for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt ready to face them. Dawn found Sarah still awake, her world a haze of old coffee, police reports, and the ache of too little sleep. Rain beat softly against her window as she watched the sky lighten over the pines. Shadow stretched out beside her, snoring gently, occasionally twitching in a dream. For a few moments, Sarah allowed herself to simply watch him, the rise and fall of his chest, the way his paws flexed as if running through a forest only he could see. It was a quiet comfort, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone in this. But the world outside didn't pause for her exhaustion. By 8 a.m., she was back at the station, her arms full of files, her mind circling a single, unshakable thought. Something bigger was at play. Every instinct screamed it. Yet when she tried to share her theory, she hit resistance like a stone wall. The captain met her in the hallway, already annoyed, his tie askew. "Bennett, you're pushing too hard on this. The Walker girl is safe. You found her. You did your job. Let the system work. We can't have you burning overtime chasing ghosts." Sarah followed him into his cramped office, where the walls were lined with plaques and faded commendations. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Sir, I don't think this is over. The evidence links Lily's abduction to other missing kids. The vehicle description, the locations, they all connect. We could be looking at a serial predator." He held up a hand. "And we could be chasing shadows, Sarah. Do you have physical evidence? A suspect? Anything beyond a gut feeling and a dog's nose?" Sarah bristled. "Shadow found Lily when nobody else could. He led us through the storm drain, straight to her." The captain's sigh was heavy. "He's a good dog, but we can't put a K9's intuition on the stand. The department's got budget cuts, pressure from city council, and reporters breathing down our necks. I'm assigning you to desk duty until further notice. Take the win and get some rest." It felt like a slap. Sarah stared at him, disbelief written all over her face. "Desk duty? Sir, you can't be serious." He didn't even look up from his paperwork. "You want to keep your badge? Follow orders. That's all." The words hung between them like a sentence. Sarah left the office with her fists clenched and her heart pounding, fighting the urge to slam the door. Shadow waited for her in the hallway, sensing her tension. He nudged her hand with his nose, his brown eyes asking, "What now?" She crouched down, burying her face in his thick fur. For a moment, she let herself feel the exhaustion, the frustration, the bitter taste of being dismissed. They're not listening, boy. They never do until it's too late. Shadow licked her cheek, tail wagging, and something in his stubborn comfort broke through the fog. Sarah straightened, wiping her eyes. If the system wouldn't help, she'd do it on her own time. She clocked out at 5, but she didn't go home. Instead, she spent the evening combing through more files, making calls to families whose children had vanished, comparing notes. Most didn't want to talk. Some had moved away. Some hung up as soon as she introduced herself. The pain was still too raw. But a few, desperate for answers, shared memories. A black SUV idling at the curb, a strange smell in the air, a shadowy figure near the woods. Each detail added weight to her conviction. Around midnight, she drove to the edge of town, parking outside an abandoned warehouse marked on her map. The building was a relic: broken windows, rusted doors, graffiti scrawled across crumbling bricks. She left Shadow in the car at first, circling the structure, flashlight sweeping over puddles and weeds. Something felt wrong, like the building itself was holding its breath. A noise made her freeze, a sharp clatter, then silence. Heart pounding, she drew her weapon and stepped closer, every sense stretched tight. She listened. Rain, the soft creak of metal, and then a dog barking in the distance. Not Shadow, but smaller, desperate. Sarah crept around the side, peering through a broken window. Inside, the darkness was almost complete, but her flashlight picked out the shape of a child's shoe, muddy and torn, lying near a stack of empty pallets. Duct tape was stuck to the floor, and a faint chemical odor clung to the air. Sarah's breath caught. This was no coincidence. She moved to the front of the building, letting Shadow out of the car. He pulled at the leash, whining, nose to the ground. "Easy, boy," Sarah murmured. Shadow led her around the back, stopping at a patch of disturbed earth. A recent footprint, adult-sized, pointing toward the woods. The hunter had almost slipped away unseen. Sarah took photos, bagged the shoe as evidence, and called it in anonymously. She knew the department wouldn't thank her, but she had to leave a trail. She was operating outside the lines now, risking her career. But as she watched Shadow sniff the air, ears alert, she felt something shift inside her. Fear turned into fierce resolve. Driving home in the early hours, Sarah couldn't escape the faces of the lost children in her mind. Their stories weighed heavy, fueling her determination. She'd find justice for them, with or without the system's blessing. And in the silence, Shadow leaned against her, warm and loyal. It was a promise. They'd keep fighting, together, no matter how high the wall grew. Sarah's days blurred into one another. A rotation of frustration, late-night coffee, and the endless shuffle of cold case files. Officially, she was still on desk duty. Unofficially, every spare moment was spent following the invisible thread that only she and Shadow seemed to believe existed. When her shift ended, she walked the town with her partner, retracing steps, mapping memories. Every time Shadow tugged at the leash, every time he paused and lifted his nose to the wind, Sarah's hope grew just a little stronger. One stormy night, nearly a week after the confrontation with her captain, Sarah's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. On the other end, a voice, frantic, breathless, spilled out a story of a child's cry heard near the old Miller storage units. The caller hung up before Sarah could ask for details, but that was all she needed. She grabbed her coat, clipped Shadow's leash, and headed into the rain. The streets were empty except for the rush of water down the gutters and the hiss of tires on wet pavement. The storage facility loomed at the end of a gravel road, chain-link fence twisted by age and neglect. Shadows gathered beneath flickering security lights, making the rows of units look like open mouths. Sarah's heart pounded. Shadow moved ahead, hackles raised, eyes wide with anticipation. His instincts were electric, and Sarah trusted him more than anyone. She slipped through a gap in the fence, ducking beneath a broken section of razor wire. Shadow waited, nose pressed to the ground, muscles coiled. Sarah crouched and let him off the leash. "Find it, boy," she whispered. Shadow took off, nose twitching, weaving between the rows. Sarah moved quietly behind, flashlight bouncing off rusted doors, the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears. Halfway down the third row, Shadow stopped. He sniffed at the padlock of Unit 17, whining, then pawed at the door. Sarah pressed her ear against the metal. Inside, she heard something, a faint shuffling, then the unmistakable sound of a child sobbing. Adrenaline surged through her. She tried the lock, rusted but solid. Shadow barked, low and urgent. No time to wait for backup. She dug into her pocket, pulling out a pry bar she kept for emergencies. Her hands shook as she wedged it beneath the lock and pushed with everything she had. The metal groaned. One final shove, and the lock snapped. The door rattled open. The smell hit her first, a sour mix of sweat, fear, and something chemical. She swung the beam of her flashlight inside. The unit was small and cold, empty except for a pile of musty blankets, a torn child's drawing taped to the wall, and duct tape scattered on the floor. In the corner, a young boy huddled, eyes wide with terror. His hands were bound loosely with tape. His mouth was gagged but not tight. Sarah rushed forward, kneeling by the boy. "It's okay. I'm here to help you. My name's Sarah, and that's Shadow. We're going to get you out." Shadow crept over, lying down beside the child, licking his face until the boy managed a watery smile. Sarah checked him quickly. No broken bones, a few bruises, eyes glassy with shock, but otherwise alert. She peeled away the tape gently, murmuring soothing words. The boy clung to her with surprising strength, whispering, "Don't let him come back. Please, don't let him find me." Sarah's chest tightened. "He's not coming back. Not while I'm here." A flash of movement caught her eye. Outside, someone darted past the doorway. Shadow sprang up, teeth bared, blocking the entrance. Sarah drew her weapon, calling out, "Police! Show yourself!" No answer, just the sound of running feet in the darkness. She hustled the boy behind her, heart hammering. "Stay with Shadow," she ordered, voice tight. She crept outside, gun drawn, scanning the shadows. The wind whipped rain across her face, stinging her eyes. A dark shape, a man, hood pulled low, sprinted toward the fence. Sarah shouted, but he vanished, melting into the night. Cursing, she hurried back inside. Shadow had positioned himself protectively in front of the boy. Sarah called 911, her hands shaking. "This is Detective Bennett. I found a missing child at the Miller Storage Units, Unit 17. Suspect may still be in the area. Send backup and medics. Now." She wrapped the boy in her jacket, stroking his hair as he sobbed into her shoulder. "It's over. You're safe." Shadow whined, pressing close. Sarah let herself breathe for the first time in hours. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights painted the parking lot. Medics whisked the boy away. Officers fanned out, combing the perimeter. Sarah gave her statement in clipped, tired sentences, watching the storage unit fill with people. She handed over the duct tape, the child's drawing, and a small, oil-stained toy car she'd found in the corner. The evidence was mounting. As she stood in the rain, shivering, the gravity of what she'd discovered began to sink in. This wasn't just a pattern. It was a predator, organized, calculating, growing bolder with each success. The system had ignored the signs. If not for a late-night call and a loyal dog, another child would have disappeared without a trace. Sarah looked down at Shadow, who wagged his tail, tongue lolling, as if to say, "We did it." She knelt beside him, hugging him tight. "Couldn't have done this without you, partner." As the ambulance drove away and the police wrapped up the scene, Sarah felt the old determination rising inside her. She would keep going, no matter the risks, no matter who tried to stop her. The walls were closing in on the predator now. She and Shadow would make sure of it. And for the first time in days, hope outweighed the darkness. Thunder rolled across the pines as Sarah stared out over the rainy parking lot, nerves strung tight as piano wire. The warehouse discovery had shifted everything. Now the department was forced to listen. The rescued boy's story, fragmented, traumatized, fit the pattern exactly. But the predator was still at large, lurking somewhere in the wet shadows of the small town, and Sarah felt the urgency like fire in her veins. She spent the day piecing together every scrap of evidence: the duct tape, the oil-stained toy car, the crude drawings, all cataloged, but they only told part of the story. It was Shadow who completed the picture, pacing the floor, pausing by the window, ears up every time a car rumbled down the street. Even as officers canvassed the area and set up patrols, Sarah's instincts screamed that their quarry was still watching, maybe even circling, ready to try again. A break came just after dusk. Sarah was reviewing traffic camera footage from roads near the storage units when her phone buzzed with an urgent text. "Black SUV seen on Ridgeway Ave. Male driver, dark hoodie, looks nervous, circling." She was out the door before the message finished loading, Shadow leaping to his feet at the jingle of her keys. Rain hammered the windshield as Sarah sped toward Ridgeway, her headlights slicing through curtains of water. Shadow braced in the passenger seat, staring out at the gloom, hackles up. The radio crackled, units in pursuit, possible visual, but the suspect was slippery, doubling back, never staying long in one place. As Sarah turned onto Ridgeway, her heart hammered. There, a black SUV, brake lights glowing red in the mist, rolling slowly past the empty park. For a split second, the driver glanced at her. Even through the downpour, she saw the glint of fear, the sharp turn of his head as he punched the gas. "Hold on!" Sarah snapped, tires screeching as she floored it, lights flashing. The SUV took off, fishtailing around the corner, speeding down the rain-slicked streets. The chase was on. Shadow barked, claws scrambling against the seat as Sarah's car skidded after the suspect. "Don't let him out of your sight, boy," Sarah growled, more to herself than to her partner. She radioed for backup, voice clipped. "Suspect vehicle in pursuit, heading east on Cedar, requesting immediate support." The town blurred past in streaks of neon and rain. The SUV wove recklessly, nearly clipping a mailbox, blowing through a stop sign. Sarah's heart pounded, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Ahead, the SUV swung wildly into an alley behind the old paper mill. Sarah jammed her car into park and jumped out, Shadow on his leash. The SUV door flew open, and a man in a black hoodie burst out, sprinting into the maze of dumpsters and shipping containers. Sarah drew her weapon, shouting, "Police! Stop!" The man vaulted a fence. Shadow barked, lunging forward. Sarah unclipped the leash. "Go, Shadow!" The dog shot ahead, disappearing into the darkness with barely a sound. Sarah gave chase, dodging puddles, boots slapping the wet asphalt. The alley twisted and turned, lit only by the faint orange glow of a distant street lamp. She caught glimpses, Shadow's shape darting ahead, the man glancing over his shoulder, a flash of panic in his eyes. He shoved over a trash can, tried to lose them in a thicket of weeds, But Shadow was relentless, nose to the ground, driven by purpose. The man ducked into a half-collapsed shed at the end of the alley. Sarah slid to a halt outside, chest heaving, gun drawn. Inside, the suspect fumbled for something. Keys? A weapon? Shadow growled, low and guttural, blocking the only exit. "Come out with your hands up!" Sarah barked. Silence, then a shuffle. The man bolted, pushing past Shadow, sending the dog spinning. He sprinted across the muddy lot, slipping in the rain, but Sarah was right behind him. She tackled him near the fence, both crashing to the ground. The suspect struggled, wild-eyed, swinging his elbows. Sarah grunted, pinning his arms. Shadow barked ferociously, circling, snapping at the air inches from the man's face. Rain streamed down Sarah's neck, soaking her through, but she didn't let go. "Get off me!" the man snarled, trying to twist free. Sarah pressed harder, the edge of desperation in her voice. "You're done running. Where are the other kids? Tell me now!" But he just spat at her, cursing. Officers arrived seconds later, yanking him to his feet, slapping cuffs on his wrists. He glared at Sarah, defiant even as his world collapsed around him. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of defeat, maybe even fear. Shadow returned to Sarah's side, panting, his fur plastered to his body but triumphant. Sarah wrapped an arm around him, whispering, "Good job, partner. You found him." Police searched the SUV, uncovering a pile of evidence: masks, rope, children's belongings. It was enough to link him not only to Lily and the rescued boy, but to cases stretching back years. As the suspect was shoved into a squad car, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion and relief. But the pain of what almost happened, of the children lost before, weighed heavy. Later, as she sat in the back of an ambulance, Shadow curled up beside her, Sarah let herself breathe, just for a moment. The hunt was over. The nightmare, for now, was finished. But as thunder rumbled and the rain washed the blood from her scraped knuckles, Sarah knew the real work was only beginning. There were children to bring home, families to comfort, and wounds, seen and unseen, that would take a lifetime to heal. Yet tonight, at least, the darkness had been pushed back. And at her side, loyal as ever, Shadow lifted his head and watched the dawn begin to break. The world always seemed quieter after a storm, but Sarah knew that silence wasn't always peace. The predator had been caught, the children rescued, and the headlines celebrated the brave detective and her miracle dog. But as the first pink light filtered through the misty pines, Sarah felt the weight of everything they'd survived. She had seen this kind of relief before. Families crying in each other's arms, officers trading high fives in the station break room, reporters shoving microphones in her face. Yet beneath the surface, a heaviness clung to her, thick as the scent of rain on asphalt. Shadow padded beside her as she walked out of the station, the applause and chatter fading behind her. His brown eyes watched her closely, sensitive to every shift in her breathing, every unspoken worry. Sarah knelt in the empty lot, burying her hands in his damp fur. "You did good, partner," she whispered, her voice raw from exhaustion. Shadow leaned into her, silent, warm, a living anchor against the storm in her mind. Later, at the hospital, Sarah stood at the threshold of Lily's room. The girl was propped up by pillows, her hair pulled back, her small face thinner but alert. When Lily spotted Shadow, her whole body lit up. Eyes wide, mouth open in a smile Sarah hadn't seen since that first night in the storm drain. The detective blinked, overwhelmed by the simple purity of that grin. "Shadow!" Lily cried, reaching out as the dog trotted to her bedside. He hopped up gently, nuzzling her shoulder. She wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him with all the trust a child can muster. Sarah watched, her heart tight, a bittersweet ache pulsing with every breath. Lily's mother stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. She mouthed, "Thank you," again and again, hugging Sarah as if afraid to let go. "You saved her life. Both of you. I don't know how to ever repay that." Sarah shook her head, swallowing hard. "You don't owe me anything. Just take care of each other." That's enough. For a while, Sarah stayed, letting Shadow and Lily enjoy their quiet reunion. The hospital was calm, the chaos over, but Sarah saw the trauma lurking behind every smile. Lily's fingers twitching, her gaze flicking to the window at every sound. Healing would take time. But Shadow's presence seemed to soften the edges, bringing comfort that Sarah herself couldn't always offer. When it was time to leave, Lily clung to Shadow, whispering secrets into his fur. Sarah gave her a stuffed animal, a German shepherd, with a badge sewn to its collar. "He'll watch over you when Shadow can't," Sarah promised, kneeling to meet Lily's eyes. The girl nodded, clutching the toy to her chest. "Promise you'll come visit?" "I promise," Sarah said, her voice thick. Back at the precinct, the paperwork began. Reports, interviews, evidence logs, and a parade of supervisors eager to take credit. Some officers congratulated her, a few apologized for doubting her, and the chief even offered a formal commendation. But for Sarah, the real victories happened in the quiet, when she caught her own reflection and saw something steadier, less haunted. She noticed it in Shadow, too, how he walked taller, how the other officers patted his head and called him hero. Still, the cost lingered. Sarah dreamed of alleys and storm drains, of running footsteps and children calling her name. She woke with a start more than once. Shadow pressed against her back, his steady breathing grounding her in the present. Sometimes she whispered her worries to him in the darkness, knowing he couldn't answer but trusting him to listen. A week after the arrest, Sarah sat alone in her kitchen, reading letters from families she'd helped. Some years ago, some just last week. Many told stories of hope or shared thanks for not giving up. Others wrote about loss, about the pain of a child never found. Sarah traced their words with her fingers, letting the sorrow and gratitude wash over her in equal measure. Shadow rested at her feet, head on her shoe, eyes half closed. "You know," she murmured, "I don't think I could have done any of this without you." He thumped his tail once, as if to say, "Of course you could." But Sarah knew better. Shadow's instincts had been the thread that tied the case together, the light in the darkness when she wanted to give up. She thought of all the times she'd doubted herself, when the system pushed back, when the trail went cold, when the faces of missing children haunted her dreams. But in those moments, Shadow was always there, silent and steady. His unspoken intuition, his refusal to quit, had saved lives, not just Lily's, not just the rescued boy, but Sarah's own as well. The department began to talk about changes, more training for K-9 units, better resources for missing children's cases, maybe even a dedicated task force. Sarah knew change would come slowly, if at all, but it was a start. She volunteered to help train new officers, sharing her story, urging them to trust their partners, human and canine alike. One afternoon, as she finished a long shift, Sarah found Shadow waiting for her in the hall. She knelt, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you, partner, for everything." He licked her cheek, his tail wagging, and Sarah let herself smile, hope blossoming in her chest. She had learned that real courage wasn't always about kicking down doors or tackling bad guys in the rain. Sometimes it was about refusing to give up, about listening when no one else would, about loving enough to keep trying even when the world seemed broken. The storm had passed, but the work continued. And in every quiet moment, every dawn and every dusk, Sarah knew she would never be alone as long as Shadow was by her side. The town of Pine Valley was never the same after the case broke. In the weeks that followed, headlines faded and sirens quieted, but something deeper had taken root. A ripple effect, subtle at first, then undeniable. Where once people hurried past each other, heads down and eyes averted, they now lingered at the park fence, sharing stories, keeping a watchful eye as their children played. At dusk, parents exchanged phone numbers, forming new bonds out of old fear. For the first time in years, the pines felt like guardians instead of shadows. Sarah found herself in unfamiliar territory. She was called into meetings with city leaders, her experience sought after, her instincts no longer dismissed, but respected. At first, the attention made her uneasy. She wasn't used to crowds, to applause, to being introduced as the detective who never gave up. It was humbling and at times overwhelming. But every time she felt lost in the noise, Shadow was there, trotting beside her, unbothered by the chaos, reminding her what really mattered. One evening, the town organized a vigil in Magnolia Park, where it all began. Lanterns lined the pathways, their warm glow flickering in the cool air. Families gathered, bundled in coats, holding hands. Children clung to their parents, but their laughter rang louder than their worries. Local leaders spoke about courage and vigilance, about the lesson learned. Evil thrived in silence, but so did hope. Sarah stood near the edge of the crowd, Shadow's leash in hand. The mayor called her to the small wooden stage, voice carrying over the hush. "Detective Bennett, would you share a few words?" Sarah's heart pounded as she stepped forward, the lanterns casting golden pools across the grass. Shadow followed, unfazed, sitting loyally by her side. She gazed out at the faces, parents, teachers, officers, children, all waiting. She had never wanted to be a public speaker, but tonight, the story belonged to everyone. She took a shaky breath. "When I started this job, I thought the hardest part would be catching the bad guys. I was wrong. The hardest part is facing what you don't see. The empty places at the table. The hope that fades every day a child is missing. The feeling that no one is listening. But hope comes back. It comes back because people refuse to give up." Sarah glanced down at Shadow. "I didn't do this alone. My partner Shadow never doubted, never hesitated. He trusted his instincts and taught me to trust mine, even when it meant breaking the rules. He reminds me that the bond between us, between all of us, is our greatest strength." She let her gaze travel across the crowd. This story isn't about one detective or one heroic dog. It's about a community that chose not to look away. You protected each other. You listened when it mattered. And you reminded me that real courage is quiet, stubborn, and shared. The applause was gentle but sincere. Sarah felt the weight on her shoulders lighten just a little. She stepped down, and Shadow nudged her hand, his tail wagging. For a moment, the park was just a park again, a place for laughter, not fear. But Sarah knew her work had changed things far beyond one case. The department, shamed by its earlier mistakes, pushed for reform. Training for K-9 units increased. Budgets shifted to prioritize missing persons cases, and a new community watch program was born. They called it Pine Watch, inspired by Shadow's tenacity. Citizens volunteered, patrols were organized, and more officers started walking the neighborhoods, building trust one handshake at a time. Sarah helped train the volunteers, showing them how to spot warning signs, how to talk to children about safety without teaching them to live in fear. She watched as parents grew bolder, walking the trails at dusk, not as victims in waiting, but as guardians of their own. She also mentored young officers, especially those who, like her, carried scars of doubt and moments of failure. She shared stories of the cases that didn't end happily, the nights spent staring at evidence boards, the weight of every what if. She told them what Shadow had taught her, that persistence matters, that listening, really listening, can save lives. As fall faded into winter, Sarah received an invitation to speak at the state conference on public safety. She hesitated, then accepted, standing before hundreds of strangers and telling them about Magnolia Park, about Lily and the rescued boy, about how trust and teamwork could turn even the darkest story toward the light. She spoke about Shadow's intuition, about the day she chose to follow him instead of the rules, about the value of loyalty and the dangers of bureaucracy. The message was simple, but it resonated. Sometimes the system's limits don't have to be yours. Compassion and courage are choices you make every day. Don't let the shadows win. Back in Pine Valley, Sarah returned to the rhythms of life. Patrols, paperwork, long walks with Shadow at dusk. She knew there would be more darkness, more cases, more nights spent chasing answers no one wanted to face. But she also knew she wasn't alone, and neither was her town. One quiet evening, Sarah sat on her porch, sipping coffee as Shadow sprawled beside her, snoring softly. The pines whispered in the breeze. Lights glimmered from houses up and down the block, neighbors waving as they let their dogs out or called their children home. Sarah smiled, feeling the pulse of something lasting, a legacy not of fear, but of vigilance, kindness, and the courage to keep searching. She scratched Shadow's ears. "We did good, partner. We did good." His tail thumped in agreement, as steady and hopeful as the dawn rising beyond the trees. In the weeks that followed the rescue, life in Pine Valley gradually settled into something like normal. The headlines faded, and the outside world moved on. But for Sarah Bennett, normal would never be the same. The darkness she'd fought was real, and its scars didn't vanish when the cameras left, or the department handed out medals. Yet, as she walked the forest trails each evening with Shadow, she realized something powerful had changed. Inside herself, inside her partner, and inside her town. One golden evening, Sarah stood at the edge of the pines with her phone out, facing the camera. The department's media officer had asked her for a personal message to the community, to everyone who had followed the case, sent prayers, and asked how they could help. She hesitated at first. Her story wasn't about glory or heroics, but about persistence, partnership, and hope found in the most unexpected places. But she knew that stories matter. Sometimes, one person's experience is the light another needs to find their way. She took a breath, glanced at Shadow sitting calmly by her side, and pressed record. If you're watching this, you already know what happened here in Pine Valley. You know about the darkness that touched our town and the light that brought us back. You know about the missing children, about the night we almost lost hope, and the morning we found it again. Sarah's voice wavered, just a bit, but she continued. I want to tell you the truth. Heroes don't always look the way you expect. Sometimes they wear a badge. Sometimes they have 4 legs and a tail. Sometimes they're a neighbor who picks up the phone, a teacher who listens, or a child who refuses to give up. Shadow saved lives not because he's special, but because he never stopped caring, never stopped searching. That's the lesson I hope you remember. She looked down at her partner, running her fingers through his thick fur. If you're lucky enough to have a loyal friend, human or canine, give them a hug tonight. Thank them. Because unconditional loyalty can illuminate even the darkest night. The camera lingered on her face, framed by the soft dusk and the steady, patient presence of Shadow. Sarah smiled, a little sad, a little hopeful. If our story touched you, I invite you to share your thoughts, or a story of hope, below. Sometimes your experience is the light someone else is looking for. And if you'd like to join us in making a difference, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. Every shared story helps build a safer, kinder world. She ended the recording, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the sense of possibility. Maybe someone would hear what they needed in her words. Maybe a parent would keep their eyes open, or a young officer would trust their instincts a little more. Maybe a child somewhere would feel a little less alone. That night, Sarah uploaded her message to the department's website, then shut off her phone and stepped outside. The sky was streaked with purple and gold, the scent of pine sharp and clean after the rain. She walked with Shadow at her side, breathing in the cool air, listening to the world settle. As they reached the edge of the woods, she paused, watching the last light fade behind the trees. Shadow sat beside her, eyes fixed on the horizon. They stood together in silence, united by the battles fought and the ones yet to come. Sarah thought of all they had learned, that justice is rarely simple, that healing takes time, and that real heroism is measured in small acts of courage, in the loyalty that holds firm when hope falters. She thought of Lily's smile, of the rescued boy's trembling hand, of the families who would forever remember both the pain and the people who showed up for them. She also thought of her own journey, of the doubt, the frustration, the moments when giving up seemed easier. But Shadow never let her. He'd been her anchor through every sleepless night. Her reassurance in every moment of fear, his quiet strength had taught her more about compassion, persistence, and faith than any textbook or badge. She knelt in the damp grass, wrapping her arms around Shadow, pressing her cheek to his fur. "Thank you," she whispered. "We made a difference, didn't we?" Shadow licked her face, tail wagging. In that moment, everything else faded. The headlines, the anger, the exhaustion. All that remained was the bond between them and the knowledge that together they had brought something good into the world. As dusk settled, Sarah knew her work wasn't done. There would always be new cases, new shadows, new children in need. But she faced that future without fear, bolstered by the legacy she and Shadow had created. Their partnership had become a beacon, not just for the department, but for a community learning to stand watch together, to speak up, to hope. The next morning, Sarah was back on duty, training new officers, walking the beat, answering questions from parents at the park. She listened to their stories, took their concerns seriously, and reminded them that vigilance was a collective effort. She watched as Shadow became something of a local legend. Kids ran to him at every event. Parents nodded in gratitude, and even the most cynical detectives stopped by to scratch his ears. The world is full of darkness, Sarah thought as she walked home that evening. But it is also full of people and animals willing to stand guard, to keep searching, to never give up. As she reached her porch, she looked out over Pine Valley, the lights of 100 homes twinkling beneath the vast, starlit sky. "Ready for the next call, partner?" she asked softly. Shadow stood, alert and steady, his silhouette framed by the gentle glow of home. Together, they faced the coming night, united by trust, by purpose, and by the knowledge that even the smallest light can drive back the darkness far beyond the pines.